Zapraszam bardzo serdecznie na bardzo ciekawy wykład. Puste kalorie, a żywność bogata w składniki odżywcze. Czy rolnicy mogą otrzymać wynagrodzenie za zwiększenie wartości odżywczej żywności? Na scenę zapraszam już teraz dr Hannę Fraser.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. My topic for you this afternoon is health and how what we do as food producers, I think, can make a big difference to human health. I'm lucky to work in two fields. I work in both medicine and agriculture. I work part-time as a hospital doctor. And back in 2018, my husband and I became first-generation farmers. Since that time, we've been on this really interesting journey, learning about all the different types of agriculture, working out what would work best on our land. We try to prioritize how we can improve the health of soil, adapting regenerative techniques. And I've thought for some time, as we're working to improve the health of our land, can we impact the health of people eating our food? Now, I'm convinced that what we eat matters, and I'm sure eating an abundance of whole, natural foods can do wonders for your health. But do we need to go further, thinking not just about what we're eating, but actually about how that food has been grown? There's a great quote from a farmer in the UK back in the 1940s. She says that the health of soil, plant, animal, and man is one and indivisible. Even back then, she could feel this intrinsic link between the health of the land and our own health. And it was with this quote in my mind that I applied for a Nuffield farming scholarship. And it's been a brilliant opportunity, having 2 years, to investigate this topic of food, farming, and health. So my first question is, what is nutrient density? We're starting to hear the phrase more and more, but what does it actually mean? Well, there are 3 categories of nutrients in our food. You've got the macronutrients, big molecules like starches, proteins, and fats. You've got the micronutrients, the minerals, and the vitamins. And then you've got the phytochemicals. This is an exciting group of all the thousands of plant chemicals, such as antioxidants, polyphenols. One researcher called it the nutrition dark matter, because it turns out there are tens of thousands of different chemicals in our food, and yet we actually can only name around a couple of hundred. I think it is the micronutrients and the phytochemicals that are really important for our health, but can be lacking in the diet. And I think it's these 2 things we should focus on when we're talking about nutrient density. And why would we be worried about nutrient density? Well, some scientists have suggested that our food today isn't as nutritious as it once was. They looked at government databases that are released every few decades that list the nutritional composition of food, and they noticed some concerning declines. This is just a snapshot of the data of carrots from the 1930s and the 1980s. You can see there's 48% less calcium, 75% less magnesium. A similar kind of trend was seen across a whole range of fruits and vegetables, and it was seen in data from the UK, the US, and Finland. A research organisation in the UK called Rothamsted, they've been growing wheat as part of an experiment since the 1850s, and they've got samples of the harvest stored from each year. So they went back to their archives to look at any nutritional changes that had happened in the grains. Each of these graphs shows a different micronutrient. So you've got zinc, iron, copper, and magnesium. And you can see from when the experiment started in the 1850s until around about the 1960s, levels of these micronutrients stayed fairly steady. But since the 1960s onwards, steady declines have been seen. And this times with when the modern dwarf varieties of wheat were introduced. These new wheat varieties really help to improve yields, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem that the micronutrient concentration kept up. So that's looking at historical changes, but another way of looking at it is seeing how variable is the nutritional quality of our food on today's shelves. This farmer, Dan Kittredge, he set up the Bionutrient Food Association to investigate this. They've been testing thousands of food products, originally from the US, but now food products from around the world, and they can see significant variation in the nutrient density. For example, one bag of spinach you might pick up from the shelf has 10 times the amount of iron as another bag. If all these spinach leaves were the same nutritional value, you'd see just one bar. But instead, you see this range of bars that represents this range of nutrient quality. In this graph, one carrot on the right-hand side has the same antioxidants as 90 carrots on the left-hand side. So you're getting far more nutritional punch if you go for that first carrot. And why would it all matter? Well, across the globe, we are facing serious chronic health challenges. In developed countries, despite relative abundance of calories, we're still lacking in some key nutrients. It's astonishing to look and see nearly half of women and young children in the UK are deficient in at least one major micronutrient. So perhaps looking at how we boost the nutritional value of food at the farm level could help solve these issues. So the next part of my 2-year study was to investigate just that. What farming practices can improve nutritional density? And I came away with 4 key areas where I think we need to focus. The first is around soil health, a big topic from today. That Bionutrient Food Association I mentioned, who were looking at nutritional variability, they've tried to correlate what makes food more nutritious. They've tried to look at, is it farms that are labeled organic, farms that are labeled regenerative? The only thing they can consistently correlate with greater nutrient density is something called the soil CO2 burst. So it's a soil test, a measure of soil respiration, an indicator of how microbially rich that soil is and how healthy it is. Farms with the greater soil CO2 burst results consistently had greater nutrition in their food products. 2 scientists, David Montgomery and Anne Bickley, have invested a lot of time in this topic, and they could explain to me why a more microbially healthy soil would produce more nutritious food. You see, all these microbes play a slightly different role at helping plants to absorb all these different nutrients from soil. They did this lovely small pilot study where they took 10 regenerative farms from across America, and they paired it with a nearby conventional farm, growing the same variety of crop on each pair of farms. And they could show that the crops grown on the regenerative farms often had greater nutrient density. Here we're looking at cabbages. The cabbage from the regenerative farm had 46% more vitamin K, 40% more calcium. Now, it was a really small study, so it's difficult to draw solid conclusions, but I think it's a really nice study design because they're controlling for things like weather and local inherent soil type, and looking at how the regenerative, healthy soils impacted the nutritional quality of food. Ergothioneine is an interesting compound with real significant health benefits for us. People whose diets are rich in ergothioneine have a lot lower rates of heart disease. Ergothioneine is a molecule produced by fungi in soil, and this group looked at how cultivation techniques affected this molecule. Oats and soybeans grown in soils where they were routinely ploughed you can see the very palest blue bar, had lower levels of ergothioneine compared with crops grown in soils that were either direct drilled or minimally tilled. So this is indicating how tillage techniques might be affecting fungal populations in the soil that are then impacting how these beneficial nutrients and compounds get into our food. And a final note on soil health, not about the nutrients, but actually the microbes themselves. You see, it turns out that some of the microbes that live in soil are the same microbes found in a healthy human gut. And it's been shown that microbes can live in raw fruits and vegetables, for example, within a salad leaf. They can survive the digestive tract and actually help seed our own gut microbiome. But of course, how those foods are produced, how microbially rich the soil is, will impact how many good bugs are getting into these raw fruits and vegetables that can ultimately impact our own gut microbiome. So the second area is around genetics. I showed the results from Rothamsted's wheat trials that had shown how genetic improvements might actually hinder some of the micronutrients, but the opposite can be true. This organization, Harvest Plus, they're working in developing countries trying to tackle real significant micronutrient deficiencies. They're selecting plants that are naturally higher in certain nutrients. For example, finding wheat that's naturally high in iron or zinc. I spoke to many breeders, and they said, yes, we could absolutely breed for greater nutrition levels, but currently there's no market incentive to do so. The Land Institute in America, they're not breeding specifically for nutrition. They're breeding perennial varieties of grains to tackle things like climate change and soil erosion. But the consequence of these plants having these incredible long root structures is that these plants have much greater access to nutrients deep in the soil. And the grains from these perennial plants are much more nutrient dense compared with annual wheats. The third area is something called biofortification, where you add in a specific nutrient at the farm level. And the best example of this I found was from Finland. You see, back in the 1980s, they realized that their soils were naturally very low in selenium, and this was meaning their livestock and their population were really low in selenium. And selenium has a key role in your immune system and also fighting off cancer cells. They worked with farmers and they made sure that selenium is now included routinely in all fertilizers. And within a matter of years, they were able to correct the selenium levels of their population. And the significance of this was really highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic, because people who had better selenium levels did better when they were infected with COVID. And the final area is around livestock feed. The more grass and green forage in an animal's diet, the more healthy omega-3 will get into the meat and milk. Now, omega-3s and omega-6s are both healthy, essential fats. But it turns out the ratio of these two things can be important. Historically, our diets would have had a sort of equal quantity of omega-3s and 6s. But our modern-day diets now, with high amounts of grains and seed oils, contain far greater levels of omega-6s and not enough omega-3s. And this can be promoting inflammation. Looking at the dairy sector, they showed that cows fed a total mixed ration with very little fresh forage. Their milk had about 8 times the amount of omega-6s compared with 3s. But the cows on a 100% grass diet had a 1-to-1 ratio, so a much greater total amount of those healthy omega-3s. There's human trials ongoing now to show what is the impact if you eat meat or milk with a better omega-3 content. How quickly and how much does it improve your own health? Now, the final question I had in my study was really, can farmers be financially rewarded for these practices that are promoting nutrient density? The sad fact is that very little financial reward is given currently. I did find one good example in France. This company called Bleu Blanc Coeur, they've designed a certification system so that if you as the farmer are feeding your livestock in a certain way that's promoting those healthy omega-3s, you can have this logo on your products, and consumers are recognizing that in the supermarket as something positive for your health. And in fact now, 40% of eggs in France have this Bleu Blanc Coeur label. But ultimately, I feel this topic of food and farming and nutrition is a field in its infancy. What we need is much greater research and much greater customer awareness before we can see significant financial reward. But I am hopeful that that might be on the horizon. As I say, I think we need really rigorous trials. We need large-scale studies to really understand these complicated links. And I think we need to involve farmers in this so we can understand what's happening on the ground. I did see some nice examples of farmers directly marketing their products, and they were able to start discussing these potential health benefits. But of course, the reach and scale of that is limited. For me as a farmer, I'm excited to see this link between soil health and nutrient density. It gives me motivation to keep going with practices to improve soil health, in the hope that one day customers might realize its importance, not just from an environmental perspective, but from their own health point of view. And I was pleased to see at a recent public health conference, the topic was One Health. This idea that the health of plants, animals, people are all connected. It was great. There was actually one farmer at this public health conference talking about agriculture, which unfortunately is so infrequent in the healthcare system at present. And I hope in the future there'll be much greater collaboration between agriculture and health. So thank you very much. I hope you found this interesting.